Hello, everyone. Welcome to Spark My Muse. I'm your host, Lisa Colon-Delay, and you are listening to Soul School Lesson 321, Martin of Tours, the soldier who cut his cape in half. Today, I'm excited to bring you the work of Justo L. Gonzalez, especially because it is Hispanic History Month. That period of time actually runs from September 15th to October 15th. I'll begin by telling you who Dr. Gonzalez is first. Dr. Gonzalez is a Cuban-American, born in Havana, and is currently 87 years old. He's a prolific author and an influential contributor in the development of Latin American theology. He might be most known for his 2-volume work he created in 1984 and 1985 called The Story of Christianity. And it's from this book, the first volume, that I'll read something today, this fascinating story I did not know very much about. Dr. Gonzalez writes, "The most remarkable example of the manner in which a saintly and monastic bishop contributed to the popularity of the monastic ideal was Martin of Tours. The Life of Saint Martin, written by Sulpicius Severus, was one of the most popular books in Western Europe for centuries and was one of the most influential elements in the shaping of Western monasticism. Martin was born around the year 335 in what is now Hungary. His father was a pagan soldier, and during his early years, Martin lived in various parts of the Roman Empire. When he was very young, he decided to become a Christian against his parents' will. His father, in order to force him away from his Christian contacts, had him enrolled in the army. I'll stop for a second to note that Christians would not serve in the army. They would usually desert the army when they became Christians because Christians were pacifists. Continuing on, it was the time when Emperor Julian, later known as the Apostate, led his first military campaigns. Martin served under him for several years. During this period, an episode took place that ever since has been associated with the name of Martin. Martin and his friends were entering the city of Amiens in what is now France, when an almost naked and shivering beggar asked them for alms. Martin had no money, but took off his cape, cut it in two, and gave half to the beggar. According to the story, later in his dreams, Martin saw Jesus coming to him, wrapped in half a soldier's cape, and saying, "Inasmuch as you did to one of the least of my brothers, you did it to me." This episode became so well known that ever since, Martin is usually represented in the act of sharing his cape with the beggar. This is also the original word of chapel. For centuries later, in a small church, there was a piece of cloth reputed to be a portion of Martin's cape. From that piece of cape, capella, the little church came to be called a chapel, and those who serve in it, chaplains. Shortly after the incident, Martin was baptized, and 2 years later, he was finally able to leave the army. He then visited the learned and saintly bishop Hilary of Poitiers, who became a close friend. He devoted himself to monastic life, while the fame of his sanctity spread through the region. It was said that God performed great works through him, but he always refused to count himself as anything more than an apprentice in the Christian life. When Martin died, many believed that he was a saint. His fame and example led many to the conviction that a true bishop ought to be like him. Thus, the monastic movement, which at first was in great measure a protest against the worldliness and pomp of bishops, eventually left its imprint on the idea itself of the episcopate. For centuries, and in some quarters to this present time, it was thought that a true bishop should endeavor to achieve the monastic ideal as much as possible. In that process, however, monasticism itself was changed, for whereas those who first joined the movement fled to the desert in quest for their own salvation, as years went by, monasticism would become, particularly in the West, an instrument for the charitable and missionary work of the Church. Already in these early stages, the monastic movement had shown its ability to evolve in various directions. From the solitude of the early anchorites it evolved into large communities, some with hundreds of members. A movement that at first eschewed books and learning soon enrolled scholars such as Jerome, Augustine, and Basil. Originally a lay movement that tended to reject much of the life of the organized church, it was soon embraced by bishops and eventually set the ideal standard for all bishops. This adaptability would continue through the ages. In the ensuing centuries, monastics would become missionaries, scholars, teachers, preservers of ancient cultural traditions, settlers of new lands, and even soldiers. In all of this, there was a common thread, the conviction that the ideal Christian life was one of personal poverty and sharing of goods. The earlier practice of Christian communities in general, of sharing goods among its members, now became the hallmark of monasticism, something expected of monks and nuns, but not the rest of the church. Now that almost all the population had become Christian, most were excused from sharing, while monastics continued that earlier tradition. Thus arose a distinction between two levels of Christians, which would mark most of the history of the church, a distinction reformed by the vows of celibacy and obedience that monastics took. In the show notes for this episode at my Substack page, I'm actually going to give you a link to read this entire book online if you'd like. It's just the first volume, but it is an amazing resource of history. Christianity takes so many twists and turns, and it gets corrupt, and then it gets refined, and there's devoted people the whole way through, but it ebbs and flows, and it changes quite a bit. The story of Martin of Tours is one of selflessness and sharing. He doesn't have any money to give, but he gives what he has for someone else in need. I had no idea this is where the word chapel or chaplain comes from the word cape and this sharing of his cape when he cut it in half. I'm so thankful for the work of Justo L.A. Gonzalez. What a fantastic contribution for the ages. Thank you for listening today. I ask that you come to sparkmymuse.com and see what other audio is there available to you. Also, come to patreon.com/sparkmymuse and see what I have for a spiritual challenge this month. Each month, I'm offering a spiritual challenge so you can dig deeper, so you can challenge yourself spiritually. As you engage with that spiritual challenge, you can report back, share your thoughts, what you're going through, and I'll respond back to you, as well as some other people who are also participating. I think it's a great chance to do some things in community that we can actually do over long distances. We don't have to be in the same room to share these things together. I continue to write my book on the desert fathers and mothers, and I appreciate your prayers as I continue that. It can be quite a challenge, but with God's help and your prayers, I think that the final product will be something really worth reading. Until next week, I wish you blessing and peace.